Paradise Lost, a South Pacific tragedy. Disclaimer: this is a true story. Names have been changed to protect the privacy of individuals and families involved. This content is recommended for viewers 18 and up. The following story contains descriptions of tragic events that should never be imitated. Case summary. The tranquil waters of French Polynesia became the backdrop for one of the most perplexing cases I've encountered in my 30 years as a detective. What began as a modern fairy tale, a brilliant aerospace engineer and a spirited yoga instructor finding love on a paradise island, ended in a devastating tragedy that sent shockwaves across 3 continents: Vietnam, France, and the United States. Elise Laurent, a Vietnamese-French yoga instructor with talents spanning multiple languages, music, and entrepreneurship, had created her dream life in the tropical paradise of Mata Phi, a coastal suburb of Nouvelle-Papete. Her path crossed with Nathan Reynolds, a MIT-educated aerospace engineer who had left his prestigious position at a major space exploration company to sail the world and work on coral reef conservation. Their whirlwind romance blossomed among pristine beaches and turquoise waters. They shared a passion for adventure, environmental conservation, and creating a meaningful life outside conventional boundaries. Social media captured their sailing journeys across beautiful locations: Mexico, Tonga, New Zealand, painting a picture of idyllic bliss. But paradise has its shadows. What the world saw was a perfect love story. What I discovered was a complex web of cultural differences, professional ambitions, isolation, and psychological pressures that culminated in an unthinkable tragedy just 5 months after their marriage. How did a relationship built on shared dreams devolve into a nightmare? What warning signs were missed? And what can we learn from this heartbreaking case about the sometimes deceptive nature of paradise? Join me, Detective James Shernan, as I unravel this tragic mystery that reminds us how quickly paradise can be lost. Like and subscribe to Crime Documentary Files for more in-depth investigations of cases that challenge our understanding of human relationships and the darkness that can hide behind picture-perfect lives. The investigation begins. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing case notes from another international incident when my secure line rang. French authorities needed American assistance on a case involving 2 expatriates, 1 American, 1 Vietnamese, French in Polynesia. The details were sparse, but the words high-profile engineer and tragic death caught my attention immediately. Good evening, viewers. Detective Shernan here. Tonight, we're diving into one of the most heart-wrenching cases I've investigated in my career with the International Crime Unit. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss any of our detailed crime analyses. The morning sun was blinding when my plane touched down in Nouvelle-Papete. Paradise greeted me with swaying palms and the scent of plumeria, but I wasn't there for vacation. A young woman's life had ended tragically, and paradise had become the scene of a nightmare. I stood on the pristine beach near where Elise Laurent had built her yoga studio. The contrast was jarring turquoise waters lapping gently at white sands, while I held photographs of a crime scene that would haunt me for years to come. Elise Laurent, born in 1993, was exceptional by any standard. Raised in France with Vietnamese heritage, she spoke 5 languages fluently. Her education took her from Paris to Rome, Berkeley, and back to Paris for her master's degree. I found myself rifling through her impressive academic records: University of Rome, UC Berkeley, Schema Business School in Paris. Not your typical profile in my case files. The locals spoke of her with reverence. She was like an angel, said Marie, the owner of a nearby cafe where Elise would often stop for breakfast. Always smiling, always spreading kindness. When she moved here in 2020, it was like the island got brighter. I walked through her yoga studio, now closed and draped with flowers left by mourning locals. The space was serene bamboo floors, open windows that let in ocean breezes, and walls painted the same turquoise as the surrounding waters. On a small shelf sat a ukulele, a reminder of her musical talents. She would sometimes end classes with a song, one of her yoga students told me, wiping away tears. Her voice was how I imagined mermaids would sound, warm, inviting, a little mysterious. I pulled up a video on my tablet Elise at 20, singing an acoustic version of Fever while strumming a guitar. Her voice was soulful, intimate, the kind that made you forget you were listening to a recording and not sitting in a small cafe with her performing just for you. But who was Elise beyond these public perceptions? I needed to dig deeper. Her cousin Thomas had flown in from Texas. We met at a quiet beachside restaurant away from curious eyes. He pushed his sunglasses up into his hair, revealing reddened eyes. Elise was always the brave one in our family, he explained, his voice catching. While the rest of us followed traditional paths, law, medicine, engineering, she followed her heart. She worked for luxury brands like Keras and L'Oen-en-Provence before launching her own clothing line, Le Petit Ami Paris. What brought her to French Polynesia? I asked, making notes in my weathered leather notebook. Freedom, authenticity. Thomas stared out at the horizon. She told me once that in Paris she felt like a bird in a beautiful cage. Here she could fly. I nodded, understanding. Some people need wide-open spaces to become themselves, but sometimes those same spaces can leave you vulnerable, far from support systems when things go wrong. Thomas continued, when she moved here in 2020, our family worried, but she thrived. The yoga studio was successful. She seemed to have found her place. He paused, swallowing hard. Then she met Nathan Reynolds, MIT graduate, former senior avionics systems engineer at a leading space exploration company, patent holder, sailing enthusiast, and now a central figure in my investigation. I had his file open on my tablet. Born March 13, 1991, in Redfield, Maine. Distinguished academic career. 6 years designing spacecraft components before abruptly leaving corporate life to sail around the world on his boat, the Haveli. What do you know about their relationship? I asked Thomas. He shrugged. It was a whirlwind. They met last April when Nathan anchored here. By June, they were inseparable. By September, married. Elise's social media became a travel journal sailing to Mexico, Tonga, New Zealand. She seemed happy, but what? I prompted, sensing hesitation. The few times we video called, something seemed off. The connection was always bad, so we couldn't talk long. She said everything was perfect, but her eyes didn't match her words. I made another note. Perception versus reality. The eternal challenge in my line of work. What appears perfect on the surface often conceals turbulent depths. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting the water in shades of gold and crimson, I couldn't help but think about the cruel irony. Elise had found Paradisea Place, where she could be free, authentic, creative, only to have that paradise become the backdrop for her final chapter. What do you think, viewers? What questions would you be asking at this point? Would you focus on Nathan Reynolds' sudden career change or Elise's apparent isolation from her family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I closed my notebook as darkness fell over the beach. My investigation was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring me face to face with Nathan Reynolds, and I needed to be prepared. Paradise had its secrets, and I was determined to uncover them all. The perfect couple. Morning light filtered through palm fronds as I made my way down to the marina where Nathan Reynolds' sailboat was docked. The 50-foot Havili sat majestically in the water, a testament to craftsmanship and privilege. A local police officer accompanied me, though this was still just a fact-finding mission. Nathan Reynolds looked nothing like his LinkedIn profile photo. The clean-cut engineer had been replaced by a man with a deep tan, sun-streaked hair and a 1,000-yard stare. He greeted me on the deck, his handshake firm, but his eyes vacant. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Reynolds," I said, accepting his offer to sit in the cockpit area. "I understand this is a difficult time." "Please call me Nathan," he replied mechanically. And yes, difficult doesn't begin to cover it. I took in the boat's immaculate condition. Everything had its place tools hanging in perfect alignment, ropes coiled with precision, surfaces gleaming despite the salt air. The engineer's mind at work, I thought. "Tell me about how you met Elise," I began, opting for a gentle entry point. His expression softened slightly. I was working with Coral Guardians, installing monitoring equipment on a reef near her yoga studio. She would paddleboard out in the mornings. One day, she paddled right up to me and asked what I was doing. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She was fascinated by the technology, how we were using sensors to track coral health. Most people just saw the tech, but she saw the purpose behind it. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. After that, we kept running into each other at local markets, beach cleanups, community events. It's a small community here. He looked out across the harbor. She brought lightness into my life. After years of corporate pressure, deadlines, the weight of billion-dollar projects on my shoulders, Elise reminded me how to live in the moment. I flipped through my notes. "You left a prominent position at a major aerospace company in 2021. That's a significant career change." Nathan's jaw tightened. I was burnt out. 6 years of 80-hour weeks, constantly pushing boundaries of what's possible. We were making history, but at what personal cost? I had accumulated enough patents and consulting opportunities to fund a different kind of life. And that life included sailing around the world? He nodded. I'd always dreamed of it. The ultimate freedom, self-sufficient, guided by wind and stars, seeing places most people only read about. And Elise shared this dream? I asked carefully. Something flickered in his eyes. She embraced it. She was adventurous, spontaneous. Cultural experiences, connecting with people around the world, that was her passion. I pulled out my tablet and showed him some of Elise's Instagram posts from their travels. "You visited quite a few places together. Mexico, Tonga, New Zealand," he confirmed. "We were planning to continue West Fiji, Vanuatu, eventually Southeast Asia, so she could connect with her Vietnamese roots." The posts painted a picture of perfect happiness, Elise practicing yoga on the deck at sunrise, both of them snorkeling over vibrant reefs, romantic dinners under star-filled skies. but I'd been a detective long enough to know that social media was often a carefully curated illusion. Nathan, did Elise ever express any reservations about the sailing lifestyle, homesickness, difficulties adjusting? He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. She loved the adventure of it, the freedom. But yes, sometimes the isolation was challenging for her. Elise was social. She drew energy from teaching, from her community here. On long passages, with just the two of us for weeks sometimes, he trailed off. Communication must have been difficult at times, I suggested. We had satellite internet, but it was expensive and unreliable. She missed regular contact with her family, her friends, her cousin Thomas especially. I made a note. Were there cultural differences that created tension? Nathan looked surprised by the question. We joked about it sometimes, her French directness versus my New England reserve. She was expressive, passionate. I'm more analytical, methodical. But that's what made us work. We balanced each other. What about professional fulfillment? Did Elise continue her yoga teaching while traveling? Another hesitation. She did classes online when connection allowed, and she worked on designs for her clothing brand. But yes, she missed teaching in person. We had talked about maybe settling somewhere longer term where she could establish a temporary studio. I nodded, making more notes. The perfect couple narrative was beginning to show cracks not unusual, but important. Every relationship has tensions, compromises. The question was whether these normal challenges had escalated into something more dangerous. Nathan, can you walk me through what happened on the day of Elise's death? The color drained from his face. He looked down at his hands, which had begun to tremble slightly. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my mind. We were anchored in a cove about 5 miles from here. It was supposed to be a day like any other. Viewers, at this moment, I was trying to read between the lines. Was Nathan's grief genuine? Were there inconsistencies in his story that needed further investigation? What would you be looking for in his behavior? Remember to share your thoughts in the comments below. As Nathan recounted the events of that tragic day, I watched not just what he said, but how he said it. The tremor in his voice, the details he emphasized, the ones he glossed over. The perfect couple had faced real challenges: isolation, career disruption, cultural differences, communication barriers. The question now was whether these challenges had culminated in the tragedy that brought me to paradise. The cracks in paradise. The local police station in Nouvelle-Papette was a modest building with surprisingly modern facilities inside. Chief Inspector Moana Tehe had been handling the case since the beginning and was willing to share their findings with me, given the international dimensions of the case. "We've been thorough, Detective Shernan," she said, spreading photographs across the conference table. The scene was processed according to international standards. I examined the photos carefully. The interior of the Haveli captured in stark police photography looked different from the pristine vessel I'd visited. Items were disturbed, surfaces stained. Violence had visited paradise. "Walk me through your timeline," I requested, pulling out my notebook. Inspector Tehai nodded. At approximately 0930 hours on May 17th, emergency services received a distress call from Nathan Reynolds. He reported that his wife had been seriously injured. Coast Guard responded within 20 minutes, but by then, she was already gone, I finished quietly. Correct. Reynolds claimed he found her unresponsive after returning from an early morning dive. The autopsy confirmed multiple traumatic injuries consistent with a fall, but also revealed several concerning details. She handed me the medical examiner's report. As I read through the clinical language describing Elise's injuries, I felt a familiar heaviness settle in my chest. Behind every sterile medical term was a human being in pain. Toxicology results? I asked, looking up from the report. Blood alcohol level of 0, 14, well above legal intoxication limits. Also traces of prescription anxiety medication not prescribed to her. Reynolds admitted they'd had an argument the night before, after which she started drinking heavily. I made notes. Any history of domestic disturbances? Calls to police? Inspector Tehai shook her head. None reported, but they traveled frequently. We've requested records from other ports they visited. And Reynolds' account of that morning? He claims he woke early, saw she was still sleeping, and went for a dawn dive at a reef about 400 meters from where they were anchored. Says he was gone approximately 45 minutes. When he returned, he found her at the bottom of the companionway stairs. He attempted CPR, then called for help. I tapped my pen against my notebook. Witness corroboration of his dive? A fisherman reported seeing a diver in that area around the time Reynolds specified, but he couldn't positively identify him. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor where the Haveli was docked. What's your read on Reynolds, Inspector? She joined me at the window. He's cooperative, seemingly devastated. But there are inconsistencies in his story that trouble me. And the circumstances, isolated location, previous argument, alcohol, prescription drugs not prescribed to the victim, they raise red flags. I nodded in agreement. I'd like to speak with some of Elise's friends here, get a better sense of their relationship. I anticipated that, the inspector replied. I've arranged for you to meet with Sophia Matutu this afternoon. She was perhaps Elise's closest friend on the island. They taught yoga together before Elise met Reynolds. That meeting took place at Sophia's modest beachfront home, where the sound of waves provided a constant backdrop to our conversation. Sophia was in her mid-30s, with the lean physique of a lifelong yoga practitioner and eyes that had clearly shed many tears recently. Elise was like my sister, she said, pouring hibiscus tea into ceramic cups. When she first came to the island, she rented my spare room while setting up her studio. We became instant friends. What was she like? I asked. Beyond the social media persona? Sophia smiled sadly. Luminous. That's the word I always think of with Elise. She had this inner light that drew people to her, but she was also deeply sensitive, sometimes insecure despite all her talents and accomplishments. Insecure about what? About belonging, about being enough. Sophia sipped her tea thoughtfully. Her family background was complicated. Vietnamese heritage, but raised fully French. Too Asian for some French circles, too European for her Vietnamese relatives. She was always searching for a place where she fully belonged. I thought about what Thomas had told me about Elise, feeling like a bird in a beautiful cage in Paris. And she found that belonging here? I thought so. She built something beautiful, her studio, her community of students, friends who adored her. Then Nathan sailed into the harbor. I detected a note of resentment. You didn't approve of their relationship. Sophia chose her words carefully. Nathan is intense, brilliant, charismatic, but used to controlling his environment. As an engineer, that's valuable. In a relationship, She trailed off. "Did you witness any concerning behavior?" I prompted. "Not abuse, if that's what you're asking. Nothing so obvious. But there was a pattern to their dynamic that troubled me. Elise was naturally exuberant, spontaneous. Nathan would make these small comments, jokes, really about her being chaotic or illogical. Over time, I watched her shrink herself to fit his expectations. I made notes. Did she ever express unhappiness or a desire to leave the relationship? Sophia set down her cup. 3 weeks before she died, Elise came to see me. Nathan had gone to Morea for supplies. It was the first time I'd seen her alone in months. Her voice caught. She wasn't the same person. She seemed anxious, constantly checking her phone. When I asked if she was happy, she burst into tears. My pen hovered over the notebook. What did she tell you? That she felt trapped, that the sailing life wasn't what she expected, beautiful destinations but crushing isolation in between, that she missed teaching, missed having roots, that Nathan would get moody, withdrawn during long passages, that she was thinking of staying here when he continued his journey west. Did she indicate she was afraid of him? Sophia shook her head. Not physically afraid, no, but she worried about his reaction if she ended things. His whole identity was wrapped up in this perfect love story, the engineer who left it all behind for love and adventure. How would he handle that narrative falling apart? I finished my tea, considering this new information. When was the last time you spoke with her? 2 days before she died. She messaged me that they were anchored nearby and might come into port the next day. She wanted to have coffee, said she had big news to share. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She'd never told me what that news was. The interview with Sophia added crucial context to my understanding of Elise and Nathan's relationship. What had appeared to be a perfect romance on Instagram showed signs of control, isolation, and growing unhappiness beneath the surface. And now there was this mysterious big news that Elise had never gotten to share. As I left Sophia's home, the sun was beginning to set over the ocean, painting the water in stripes of gold and crimson. Paradise was putting on its evening show, but I couldn't appreciate the beauty. My mind was filled with images from the case file clinical crime scene photos that told a story of paradise lost. I needed to speak with Nathan again, this time with much harder questions. Think about it, viewers. What would that big news have been? Was Elise planning to leave Nathan? Or was there something else she wanted to share with her friend? And how might this information have played into the events that followed? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Before we continue, I'd like to remind you to hit that like button if you're finding this investigation compelling. Your engagement helps us bring more in-depth crime analyses to the platform. The final hours. The morning of my second interview with Nathan Reynolds began with a development. Inspector Tehoy called as I was having breakfast at my hotel. "We've obtained records from a medical clinic in Morea," she said without preamble. "Elise visited a doctor there 2 weeks before her death. She was prescribed anti-nausea medication." "Morning sickness?" I asked, immediately making the connection. The doctor confirmed she was approximately 8 weeks pregnant. She requested the information be kept confidential, said she wanted to tell her husband herself. The big news Sophia had mentioned. Elise had been pregnant. This revelation cast everything in a new light. I arrived at the marina with a heavier step, the weight of this knowledge adding to the growing complexity of the case. Nathan was working on the boat when I arrived, replacing a section of weathered rope with methodical precision. He nodded in greeting, but continued his task until it was complete. "Sorry," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "If I don't finish a job once I've started, it bothers me all day." I recognized the comment as consistent with what Sophia had described a man who needed control over his environment, who valued order and completion. How had he reacted to the disorder of grief? "Nathan, I appreciate you meeting with me again," I began once we were seated in the cockpit. "Some new information has come to light that I need to discuss with you." His face remained impassive. Of course, anything to help understand what happened to Elise. "Did you know your wife was pregnant?" The question landed like a physical blow. Nathan's face drained of color, his body going completely still. For several seconds, he didn't even appear to breathe. "What?" he finally managed, voice barely audible. Elise was approximately 8 weeks pregnant when she died. Medical records confirmed she knew about the pregnancy. "She hadn't told you?" Nathan's hands began to tremble. He gripped the edges of his seat as if to steady himself. "No," he whispered. "She hadn't told me anything." His eyes filled with tears. "A baby? We were going to have a baby?" His reaction seemed genuine. The shock, the grief for a future now doubly lost. But I needed to press further. "Nathan, this raises some important questions. If Elise knew she was pregnant, why would she be drinking heavily and taking unprescribed medication the night before she died?" He shook his head, confusion evident. She wouldn't. Elise was health conscious to an extreme degree. Even before she became a yoga instructor, she was careful about what she put into her body. It doesn't make sense. Unless she didn't take those substances willingly, I suggested, watching his reaction closely. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What exactly are you implying, Detective?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm exploring all possibilities. You stated you had an argument the night before. What was it about?" Nathan ran a hand through his hair, his engineer's composure cracking slightly. "It was stupid. We were discussing our next destination. I wanted to head to Fiji directly. Elise wanted to return to Nouvelle Papite first, stay a few weeks. She missed her friends, her yoga community, and how did that discussion end?" "Unresolved," he admitted. "I went to bed. Elise said she wanted to look at the stars for a while, clear her head. When I woke up in the morning, she was in bed beside me, still sleeping. At least, I thought she was sleeping." His voice cracked. "I should have checked on her, but I didn't want to wake her after our argument. So I went for my dive. I made notes, then looked up at him directly. Nathan, I need you to be completely honest with me. Was there any point during your argument or afterward when things became physical? When either of you might have pushed or struck the other?" "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "We had disagreements like any couple, but it never, ever became physical. Did you know Elise was considering staying in Nouvelle Papite permanently, not continuing the journey with you?" Surprise flickered across his face. She mentioned wanting to stay longer than I'd planned, but not permanently. He paused, thinking. Although, looking back, there were signs. She'd been more withdrawn during our last passage, more homesick for this place. And how would you have reacted if she'd told you she wanted to end the journey, end the relationship? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I would have been devastated," he finally said. "I loved her, but I wouldn't have forced her to stay." He looked out at the harbor, tears falling freely now. "All I ever wanted at the silent stretch, giving him space to continue if he wished. "Detective," he eventually said, "I know how this looks. Isolated location, argument the night before, alcohol and drugs in her system, injuries consistent with a faller with being pushed. I understand why you're here, why you're asking these questions. But I need you to know I would never hurt Elise. Never." I nodded, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "There's one more thing I need to do today, Nathan. With your permission, I'd like to examine the interior of the boat, specifically the area where you found Elise." He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." The companionway stairs leading into the main cabin of the Haveli were steep, typical for a sailboat where space is at a premium. I descended carefully, noting the solid teak steps and the hardwood floor at the bottom. A fall here would indeed cause significant injuries. The main cabin was compact but elegant. A small galley kitchen, dining table that converted to additional sleeping space, and various storage compartments built into every available surface. At the bow end, a door led to what I presumed was the main sleeping quarters. "This is where you found her?" I asked, indicating the floor at the bottom of the stairs. Nathan nodded, his face ashen. She was lying there, on her side. I thought at first she had just fallen. I called her name, then realized she wasn't responding. His voice became clinical, detached, an engineer reporting facts. I checked for a pulse, couldn't find one. Started CPR while calling for emergency services on the satellite phone. I knelt down, examining the floor where Elise had been found. The police photos showed bloodstains that had since been cleaned. I looked up at the steep stairs, mentally calculating trajectories of a fall. The medical examiner noted multiple impacts, I said. Not just what you'd expect from a simple fall down the stairs. Nathan's detachment faltered. "I don't know what to tell you. I wasn't here when it happened." I stood, taking in the entire space again. My gaze landed on a small built-in bar where a few bottles of spirits were secured in custom holders. "Did Elise drink often?" I asked. "Occasionally. Wine with dinner sometimes. Rarely spirits." I moved to the sleeping quarters, pausing at the threshold. "May I?" Nathan nodded permission. The bedroom was surprisingly spacious for a boat, with a queen-sized bed taking up most of the space. Here, too, everything was meticulously organized books, aligned on small shelves, clothing stored in carefully designed compartments. On a small bedside shelf sat a framed photograph of Nathan and Elise, taken on what appeared to be their wedding day. She was wearing a simple white dress, flowers in her hair, her smile radiant. Nathan looked at her with undisguised adoration. It was painful to contrast that image of joy with the clinical crime scene photos in my file. As I turned to leave the bedroom, something caught my eye, a small notebook partially visible under the edge of the bed. I knelt down and pointed to it. "Is that yours, or Elise's?" I asked. Nathan looked surprised. "I don't recognize it. Must be Elise's." With gloved hands, I carefully retrieved the notebook. The cover was decorated with hand-drawn mandala patterns. Inside, I found page after page of Elise's handwriting journal entries dating back several months. "I'll need to take this as potential evidence," I told Nathan. "We'll provide you with a receipt." He nodded numbly, still staring at the photograph of their wedding day. As I left the Haveli, journal in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. Nathan's grief seemed genuine. His shock at learning about Elise's pregnancy appeared real. Yet the circumstances surrounding her death remained deeply troubling. What secrets would Elise's journal reveal? What had really happened on that final night aboard the Havili? And would the truth bring justice for Elise and the unborn child she had carried? The Pacific sun beat down mercilessly as I walked back toward the police station. Paradise, a mocking backdrop to tragedy. Viewers, what do you think about Nathan's reaction to learning about the pregnancy? Does his shock seem genuine to you? And what might Elise have written in her journal about their relationship? Remember to share your theories in the comments below. As we approach the conclusion of this investigation, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Documentary Files so you don't miss the final revelations in this tragic case. The truth emerges. Inspector Tehe and I spent hours reviewing Elise's journal entries, starting from the most recent and working backward. What emerged was a complex portrait of a woman torn between two worlds, the adventurous sailing life with a man she loved and the community connections she had built in Nouvelle Pépite. The final entry was dated just 2 days before her death. I still haven't found the right moment to tell Nathan about the baby. He's been so focused on preparations for Fiji. How do I tell him I don't want to go? That I want our child to have a solid foundation, not a constantly moving horizon? That I'm tired of the isolation, the seasickness that's now compounded by morning sickness, the days without seeing another soul besides him? I love him, but I'm drowning in this life. Tomorrow, we'll be closer to shore. I'll finally tell him everything over dinner about the baby, about wanting to stay here, about needing roots rather than sails. I pray he understands. If he doesn't, the entry ended there, the thought unfinished. Earlier entries painted a picture of a relationship that had begun with passion and shared dreams, but had evolved into something more complicated. Elise wrote about feeling increasingly anxious during long ocean passages, about missing her yoga students and friends, about Nathan's occasional dark moods when mechanical problems arose or weather-forced changes to their plans. She also wrote about the cultural differences that created tension, her emotional expressiveness versus his logical approach to conflict, her need for community versus his self-sufficiency, her spiritual practices versus his empirical worldview. But there were beautiful moments too, stargazing together on the deck, encountering whales and dolphins, connecting with local people in remote islands, making love under tropical skies. The journal revealed the full complexity of their relationship, neither the picture-perfect romance of social media nor a simple story of control and unhappiness. What happens next in our investigation? Inspector Tehe asked after we'd reviewed the journal. I closed the notebook thoughtfully. We need to re-examine the toxicology findings in light of what we now know. Elise was health conscious, especially knowing she was pregnant. The presence of alcohol and unprescribed medication in her system doesn't align with her character or her recent choices. The inspector nodded. I'll have the lab run additional tests. What's your read on Reynolds? Complex, I admitted. His grief appears genuine. His shock at learning about the pregnancy seemed real, but there are still unanswered questions about that final night. Armed with insights from the journal, I requested a final interview with Nathan. We met on neutral ground this time, a quiet conference room at my hotel, rather than aboard the Havili. Nathan looked exhausted, grief etching deeper lines into his face since our last meeting. I began gently but directly. Nathan, we've reviewed Elise's journal. She wrote about her pregnancy and her intention to tell you about it the night before she died. She also planned to tell you she wanted to stay in Nouvelle Papete permanently. He nodded slowly. That explains why she was so insistent about returning here instead of sailing straight to Fiji. If I'd known she was pregnant, his voice broke. Everything would have been different. How so? I would have done whatever she needed. If she wanted to stay here, we would have stayed. The journey was never more important than her happiness. Nathan, I need to ask you some very specific questions about the night Elise died. I need absolute honesty. He straightened in his chair. Ask, did your argument that night become more heated than you previously indicated? Did Elise tell you about the pregnancy after all? No, he said firmly. The argument was frustrating but not explosive, and she definitely didn't mention being pregnant. If she had, You what? I would have agreed to stay here, immediately. No question. I nodded, making notes. After the argument, you said Elise wanted to stay up and look at the stars. Did you go to bed immediately? He hesitated. No. I was still frustrated. I took my prescription sleep medication. I sometimes have trouble sleeping after disagreements. My mind keeps working on solving the problem. The medication helps quiet my thoughts. This was new information. What medication specifically? Lorazepam. I've had a prescription for years, since my high-stress days in aerospace. I made another note. Where do you keep this medication? In the bathroom cabinet. It's not locked or anything. We didn't have secrets like that from each other. And do you take this medication with alcohol? Never, he said firmly. It's dangerous to mix them. My doctor was very clear about that. I leaned forward. Nathan, the toxicology report found lorazepam in Elise's system, the same medication you just mentioned. It was found alongside a significant amount of alcohol. This combination could cause confusion, impaired coordination, even unconsciousness. Nathan's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror. Are you saying Elise took my medication? Why would she do that? She knew about the risks, especially while pregnant. That's what troubles me, I said. It seems completely out of character based on her journal entries and what everyone has told me about her. The room fell silent as Nathan processed this information. I watched his face carefully, looking for signs of deception or rehearsed reactions. Instead, I saw his analytical mind working, connecting dots. The bottle, he said suddenly. Check if the bottle was moved. What bottle? Of rum. We had an unopened bottle of Polynesian rum someone had given us as a wedding gift. Elise didn't drink rum, especially not straight. She said it reminded her of medicine. It was kept in the Bilton bar, still sealed as far as I knew. If she was drinking that night, that's the only alcohol that would have been available on board. This was potentially significant. We'll check the evidence inventory, I promised. Now, one final difficult question. Is there any possibility at all, that you might have taken your medication, had something to drink yourself, and then not remembered an interaction with Elise? A continuation of your argument that became physical? Nathan's face paled. Are you asking if I could have hurt her while intoxicated and then forgotten about it? I have to consider all possibilities. He shook his head vehemently. No, absolutely not. First, I never mixed my medication with alcohol, period. Second, I've never had blackouts or memory loss. And third, no matter how intoxicated I might hypothetically become, I would never, ever harm Elise. It goes against everything I am. I studied him carefully. Thank you for your honesty, Nathan. I have just one more request. Would you be willing to provide a detailed written timeline of everything you remember from that evening and the following morning? Every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Of course, he agreed. Anything that helps find the truth. As our interview concluded, Inspector Tehe called with a significant update. The lab had completed additional toxicology tests, including hair analysis, that could show patterns of drug use over time. Elise's hair sample shows no previous exposure to lorazepam before the night she died, the inspector reported, and the alcohol and medication in her system were at levels consistent with consumption within 1 to 2 hours before death. What about the rum bottle Nathan mentioned? It was in the evidence inventory. The seal was broken, and fingerprint analysis shows only Elise's prints on the bottle and a single glass found nearby. I thanked her and hung up, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to shift in my mind. The next morning, I received Nathan's written timeline. His account was detailed and consistent with his previous statements, but included additional context about their relationship dynamics that aligned with what I'd read in Elise's journal. One passage in particular stood out. I've thought constantly about why Elise would take my medication and drink alcohol that night. The only explanation that makes any sense to me is that she was in terrible emotional turmoil about telling me her news. She knew how much continuing our journey meant to me. Perhaps she thought the medication would calm her anxiety about our conversation. Perhaps the alcohol was liquid courage. I'll never know for certain because I failed her by not being awake, by not checking on her when she didn't come to bed. By the time I found her the next morning, it was too late. After reviewing all the evidence, the journal, the toxicology reports, the timeline, the witness statements, I reached my conclusion. I shared it first with Inspector Tehe, who, after some discussion, agreed with my assessment. Together, we met with Nathan on the beach, near where the Haveli was docked. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sand. We've completed our investigation, I told him. Based on all available evidence, we believe Elise's death was a tragic accident, likely caused by impaired coordination from the combination of alcohol and medication. She appears to have taken your prescription, perhaps, as you suggested, to calm her anxiety about the difficult conversation she planned to have with you. The alcohol may indeed have been liquid courage. Nathan closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. She was trying to find courage to tell me about our baby, about wanting to stay here, and instead, Nathan, Inspector Tehe said gently, there's no way you could have anticipated this. The evidence suggests Elise made these choices herself, without your knowledge. But if I hadn't gone to sleep, he said, voice breaking, if I'd stayed up with her, talked through our disagreement that night instead of withdrawing. You can't torture yourself with what-ifs, I told him. Based on our investigation, there was no indication of foul play. You've been cleared of any wrongdoing. Nathan nodded numbly, looking out at the ocean that had been both their shared passion and the backdrop to tragedy. What happens now? Officially, we'll file our final report. Elise's body can be released for burial according to her family's wishes. I paused, then added more personally, unofficially, you begin the long process of healing, of forgiving yourself for things beyond your control. As Inspector Tehe and I walked away, leaving Nathan alone with his grief on the beach, I couldn't help but reflect on the cruel ironies of the case. Elise had found both love and adventure with Nathan, had created a new life growing inside her, had been ready to put down roots. One moment of impaired judgment, taking medication not prescribed to her, drinking alcohol while pregnant, had ended not just her life, but also the future she had been so close to creating. Paradise, I thought, looking back at the sunset gilding the lagoon in otherworldly beauty, is never without its serpents. Conclusion. As my plane lifted off from Nouvelle-Papayette 3 days later, I gazed down at the azure lagoons and verdant mountains rapidly shrinking below. From this height, French Polynesia looked like the paradise it advertised, perfect, unspoiled, dreamlike. But I knew better. I had seen the darkness that could hide in paradise. The case of Elise Laurent and Nathan Reynolds wasn't about evil or malice. It was about miscommunication, cultural differences, the gaps that can open even between two people who deeply love each other. It was about how isolation can magnify small problems into insurmountable ones, about how fear of disappointing someone you love can lead to tragic choices. Elise's family had arrived from France the day before my departure. I met briefly with her parents and cousin Thomas. Their grief was palpable, but so was their determination to honor her memory. They planned to establish a yoga scholarship in her name, helping young people from diverse backgrounds train as teachers. Elise believed yoga could build bridges between cultures, between people, her mother told me. We want her legacy to continue that work. Nathan had offered them his complete cooperation, including access to all of Elise's belongings and her share of their joint assets. He had also made the difficult decision to sell the Havili. I can't set foot on it again, he told me during our final conversation. Every corner holds memories of her. He planned to stay in Nouvelle-Papayette for some time, working with choral gardeners and processing his grief. This is where she was happiest, he said simply. It feels right to be here, at least for now. As my plane crossed the international date line, I completed my case notes. The official conclusion was accidental death, and the evidence supported that finding. Yet I couldn't escape a lingering sense of all the small moments where a different choice might have led to a different outcome. If Elise had voiced her concerns earlier, if Nathan had been more attentive to her growing unhappiness with their nomadic lifestyle, if either of them had prioritized open communication over maintaining a perfect facade, their love story, which had seemed so magical on social media, contained the same challenges as any relationship. The need for compromise, for honest conversation, for balancing individual dreams against shared ones. Their tragedy wasn't that they didn't love each other enough. It was that love alone isn't always sufficient without the hard work of truly understanding each other's needs. For those of you watching, I hope there are lessons to take from this heartbreaking case. Check in regularly with your loved ones, especially during major life transitions. Create space for difficult conversations before they become crises. Be attentive to signs of growing disconnection or unhappiness. And never, ever mix prescription medications with alcohol or take medications not prescribed to you. Paradise can be found in many places: a tropical island, a sailing adventure, a loving relationship. But paradise requires maintenance. It requires honest communication, mutual respect, and sometimes difficult compromises. Without these fundamental elements, even the most beautiful paradise can become the setting for tragedy. This has been Detective James Shernan with Crime Documentary Files. If you found value in this investigation, please like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analyses of complex cases. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspects of this case resonated most with you? What warning signs do you think were missed? Remember, the goal of examining these tragedies isn't merely to satisfy curiosity, but to learn from them to become more attentive to the people we love and more aware of the complex dynamics that shape our relationships. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware. Disclaimer: this case study is based on real events, but names and some details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. If you or someone you know is struggling with relationship issues, isolation, or substance use, please reach out to appropriate support services. And remember, never take prescription medications not prescribed to you, especially during pregnancy.